Welcome into the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner joining you after another successful weekend for the Fighting Saints. Through 20 games, you really haven't been able to find a weekend that hasn't been a success for Dubuque. The Fighting Saints are now 16-3-1, somehow still third in the Eastern Conference because the teams above them, and we'll touch on that a little bit later, the teams above them keep winning as well. It's been a pretty remarkable start for the top three in the Eastern Conference, but the Fighting Saints are doing their part, winning 2 games against Muskegon Friday night in blowout fashion, 5-2, and then Saturday it was much closer for the majority of the game. They pulled away with a 3-1 victory. No surprise that defense took center stage for the Fighting Saints, again outscoring Muskegon 8-3 in those 2 games. But we'll start with this note. Through 20 games, they have 16 wins, ties the club mark by the 2012-2013 team. We know how good that team was, how many accolades they won. They're off to just as good of a start through 20 games as that team is. Pretty rare air.
It most definitely is. This is we've said it many times. This is such a tough league, and you have to worry about difficult schedules, travel schedules, home away. Through 20 games to have 16 wins is pretty impressive. Especially you're looking at a team that had quite a bit of turnover, and there's a lot of fresh faces on this team, and it just shows that Callie Larson did an outstanding job of bringing in good talent this year, and the coaching staff has done a remarkable job of making adjustments and getting to the point where they can have success every weekend. You see it so many times. A team gets off to such a hot start, the rest of the league makes adjustments, and the coaching staff has to make adjustments right along with it. And I think the Fighting Saints have really done a nice job of that through the first 20 games.
And this series against Muskegon was one that, coming into it, looking at it on paper, it was one that the Fighting Saints probably should have swept based on the amount of players that Muskegon had missing, whether it was to injury in the second game. Oliver McDonald played Friday. Daniil Gushchin and Rhett Pitlick out for the entire weekend. But this is still a Muskegon team that was much better overall, I think, than the time Dubuque played them to begin the season. They've started to figure things out. And in both games, even though Dubuque started off really strong in the first game, in the first period they're up 2-0, both games enter the third period with 2-1 scores. So Dubuque really had to grind for the 4 points.
Well, and you look at where Muskegon is in the standings. They're right around the 500 mark, and that's. But at this point in the season, you'd like to think that their record is, you are what your record says. But I keep going back to the fact that just a week earlier, they got 3 out of 4 points against Chicago. And I think Chicago is, in my opinion, I think they're the number 1 team in the league right now because they've been so consistent and they've put up a lot of good style points. So to get 3 out of 4 points against Chicago really got my attention, and I'm sure it got the coaching staff and the players' attention. So to go and sweep a Muskegon team that's been playing well, regardless of who's in the lineup or out of the lineup, they had to have a lot of confidence coming into this weekend, and to get 3 out of 4 points is pretty significant, and it shows me that this Dubuque team is pretty much legit.
Yeah, 20 games is a good sample size. I know earlier shows that this season we're talking about, okay, we're 2 weeks in, we're 3 weeks in. This team's in first, they might be in last by 2 weeks from now. So now we start to see there are still some teams that we're unsure of, I know, but the cream of the crop have separated themselves. Chicago, Dubuque, and Waterloo for sure, and even Team USA can be included in that discussion. They're 17-7 so far. 34 points is second best in the USHL. As we dive into both games this weekend, Friday was statistically, in terms of goals, the best single game performance by a Fighting Saints defenseman in team history. Braden Doyle records the first ever hat trick by a Fighting Saints D-man in Tier 1 history that spans 9 seasons plus into this year. Pretty surprising that no Fighting Saints defenseman has scored 3 goals, in the sense that it's a team that's been so successful. But then when you think about defensemen and hat tricks, it's not something that comes up a lot. So Doyle to get that first hat trick, I know he didn't know the stat before that night. I barely knew the stat before that week. Luckily, Schulteis scored 2 goals the weekend before, and I was looking into that. But a really incredible performance for Braden Doyle to single-handedly outscore Muskegon in that game and really kickstart a solid offensive effort for Dubuque.
Yeah, I have to give a public service announcement. I got to give you a lot of credit for finding that stat. There's only one person on the planet who knew that stat, and that's you. And credit to you for going back and finding all those stats, because there's been a lot lot of great, remarkable achievements here in Dubuque over the last 9 years, and credit to you for going back and finding those.
Before you continue, I'd just like to say something as well. I'd also like to echo those statements. Credit to me. I really put a lot of pride in going after those stats. So
but that gives your listeners, a really good perspective on what's going on. So hats off to you.
And credit to Ben Schulteis, because if he didn't score those 2 goals, I never would have found that stat out as quickly as I did. So it goes back to him.
You're a perfect embodiment of this team because you're always passing credit to everybody else. So good for you. But again, going back to Braden Doyle, he's a good defenseman, a flashy defenseman, a good offensive creator. And it was just a matter, I think he needed to shoot the puck a little bit more. He's the first part of the season, he was really more looking to pass first and not quite jumping up into the offense as much as Coach Oliver David would have liked him to do. And, that game he really did. And when he got the puck and he saw any kind of an opening or any kind of lane, he took it. And that's an exciting element to add to his game. And, we keep talking about secondary scoring and, balancing out the score sheet. A game like that is really going to help this team because it's going to take pressure off those top-end guys. It's going to take a little pressure off the Jacksons and the Gabers of the world. You can't just focus on them. You have to be a little bit wary of what's happening on the back end. And, when that happens, when you get that secondary scoring, you get a lot of different guys contributing. It's tough for a team to focus on one particular line, and I think that's going to be a huge benefit to this team.
And I think we talked about earlier on this season in the Fighting Saints report that Doyle, the amount of skill that he has, he could sleepwalk his way into 30 points in this league this season. I was expecting a good season from him. Right now, he's exceeded those expectations just in the sense that he's off to a quicker start than I had imagined. 14 points through the first 20 games for Doyle. He's top 5 in the USHL in scoring, and on this pace, he's going to hit the 30-point mark, no doubt about it. But not only to get points from the blue line, because points from the blue line is really good. The Fighting Saints did a good job of it last year. I think they finished top 5 in terms of defensive scoring in the league. I'd have to imagine they're up close to there this season as well. But to have the legitimate threat of right now, it's 2 players, and really, if you look at this team, I would say it's 3 players once Aiden Fulp gets going a little bit more, but 3 players that legitimately can score anytime they touch the puck at the blue line. And Schulteis, Doyle, and Fulp only has a 1 goal, but I think he's going to get at least 4 or 5 more this season. That's a really, really big weapon for the Fighting Saints. That means you have to go out and challenge those guys, and ultimately, it gives more room to the people down low.
Exactly. I think that's the big key. And I mean, I think you look at the early part of the season, it was the Jacksons and the Reese Gabers who were really, and Cherameta, those guys were really kind of carrying the load for the Fighting Saints. And, we talk about adjustments. Teams will start sagging on those guys. They'll start collapsing on those guys and not allowing them to, have as much freedom or time and space as you'd like them to have. That opens up your defensemen, and then your defensemen have to take advantage of that. And, that's what I've seen here recently is that the defensemen are starting to jump up, and they're starting to take advantage of that extra space that teams are giving them. And now it's kind of working the opposite. Now you have to pay a little bit more attention to those defensemen, and that opens up the forwards down low. So, I mean, it's a great problem to have, but, you look up and down this Fighting Saints roster, there's so many offensive weapons, and they're taking advantage of all those offensive weapons. And, that's how you have a game like this, where maybe Muskegon's focusing on those other guys, and they leave Doyle open a little bit. Credit to them, they collapsed on him, or they paid a little bit more attention to him on Saturday night. But again, it's an illustration of what you have to do. You have to have balanced scoring if you want to be successful in this league.
Fighting Saints are a tough team to game plan for right now with all of the different avenues that they can draw offense from. There wasn't nearly as much offense, and not just on the scoreboard, but also in terms of chances on Saturday night. More of a defensive game, but if anything, that's a game that you don't want to get into with the Fighting Saints because they've defended better than anyone in the league this season. They win 3-1 thanks to an empty netter from Reese Gaber. Dylan Jackson got the teddy bear toss goal for the Fighting Saints, and it was a shorthanded tally from Ryan Beck, who, for my money, and I think for yours as well, it's safe to say he probably had overall his best weekend of the season for the Fighting Saints. 1 goal, but also a tremendous game on Friday night. But Muskegon was much better on Saturday, and Oliver David mentioned that in his pregame comments. He said it's really tough to sweep the same team. They're going to come out hard. Dubuque knew they were going to come out hard, and they were better with even less offensive threats on Saturday night, which goes to show, again, how difficult it is to sweep in this league. But Dubuque, the defense, which has been the MO of this team all season long, was able to get them a win on Saturday.
Yeah, one thing that really impressed me, a difference in Muskegon in particular, I thought they did a much better job of getting to the net front and really creating traffic in front of Eric Portillo. If you're minus a couple big weapons, couple big offensive or creative offensive players, the best way to remedy that is just to go to the front of the net, create havoc in front, get an ugly goal, get a couple rebound goals, or do some ugly things. I thought early on in Saturday night, Muskegon did a much better job of that, and there were a few hairy moments there, I thought, where a puck could go in here or there, or Eric Portillo didn't necessarily see the shot from the point or didn't see a bouncing puck. And then I thought the Saints from the second period on, I thought they did a much better job of clearing out the net front and letting Portillo see those shots. And, I think that was defensively, I think that was the biggest adjustment and what really helped them win that hockey game.
Yeah, we're 11 weeks into the season now. This is the 8th week, or weekend, I should say, that Dubuque hasn't suffered a single loss. They've only had losses in 3 weeks this entire season, which is pretty impressive. 2-0 on the weekend, 5-2 against Muskegon on Friday, 3-1 against Muskegon on Saturday. That's all the time we have for the first segment here. When we come back, we'll go around the USHL. We'll talk about those two other teams in the Eastern Conference that continue to stay just ahead of Dubuque. And we'll also look at the Western Conference, which is a little bit more of a cluster there between the 2nd and 7th seeds.